Still wearing clothes from the clearance rack? My sister Jessica said it loud enough for the entire Thanksgiving table to hear, her voice dripping with that particular brand of cruelty only family members can perfect. She gestured at my sweater with her fork like she was pointing out a stain. I mean, didn't Grandma leave you anything in the will? Or did that all go to late fees? The table erupted. Not with gasps of disapproval at her rudeness, but with laughter. Genuine, belly-deep laughter, like she'd just delivered the punchline to the funniest joke they'd ever heard. My name is Natalie Brooks, and from wherever you're watching this, I need you to stay with me, because what happens next will remind you that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Have you ever sat at a table surrounded by people who share your blood but treat you like you're borrowing their air? People who've decided your worth based on the car you drive, the neighborhood you live in, the price tag on your jacket? That was every family gathering for me. That was Thanksgiving at Aunt Linda's house in the West Hills, where the chandelier cost more than I supposedly made in 6 months, and the wine was older than my college degree. They sat there in their tailored blazers and statement jewelry, faces glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to check your bank account before buying groceries. And me? I sat at the far end in a sweater I'd bought for $9, eating sweet potatoes I hadn't been asked to bring, watching them measure my life against theirs and find it pathetic. Jessica wasn't done. She never was. You know, Nat, I've been meaning to ask, what exactly do you do all day? I mean, you work at that little nonprofit, right? Do they even pay you? Or is it all volunteer? Her boyfriend, some finance bro named Colin, snickered into his wine glass. My cousin Eric chimed in from across the table. Dude, I saw her getting off the bus last week in the rain. The actual bus. Like Trimet. He said it like I'd been spotted crawling out of a dumpster. My cousin Amanda, his sister, tilted her head with fake sympathy. It's just, we worry about you, Natalie. You're not getting any younger. What's the plan here? Live in that little apartment forever? My Uncle Richard, Aunt Linda's husband, leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon. Some people just aren't wired for success. It's not a bad thing. Somebody's gotta work the small jobs. The agreement that rippled through the room was suffocating. I looked down at my plate. Dry turkey, lumpy mashed potatoes, and a side of shame I hadn't ordered. This wasn't new. This was every holiday, every birthday, every casual Sunday dinner where I was invited out of obligation and humiliated out of tradition. They'd been doing this since I was 16. Since my mom died and the money dried up, or so they thought. Since I started taking the bus to school while they got new cars for their birthdays. Since I worked weekends at a grocery store while they summered at Cannon Beach. They had decided who I was, poor Natalie, struggling Natalie, the one who would die poor and forgotten. And for years I let them believe it. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you time. Time to move in silence. Time to plan. Time to watch people reveal exactly who they are when they think you're not a threat. And on that particular Thanksgiving, as Jessica launched into another monologue about her new Tesla and how it practically drives itself, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Mr. Harrison Weber. My throat tightened. I stood up, smoothing my clearance rack sweater. Excuse me, I need to take this. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. Of course you do. Probably a creditor. More laughter. I walked past the table, past the oil paintings and the marble countertops, and stepped out onto Aunt Linda's back patio. The Portland skyline stretched out before me, lights flickering on as the sun set behind the West Hills. I raised the phone to my ear, my hand steadier than I expected. Miss Brooks, came the calm, professional voice of Mr. Weber. I'm calling to confirm we've finalized the trust documents as of today. The funds are accessible as you requested. All $500 million is cleared and transferable to your primary account, or we can issue the ceremonial check for your records. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. The world felt like it tilted just slightly, like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years and only just now remembered how to let it out. Issue the check, I said quietly. I'd like to see it in writing. Understood. We'll have it ready tomorrow morning. Congratulations, Miss Brooks. Your mother would be very proud. I thanked him, ended the call, and stood there for a moment, staring out at the city. My mother, Catherine Brooks. The woman who died when I was 17, who worked herself to exhaustion, who dressed me in second-hand clothes and smiled through every struggle because she knew something they didn't. She knew what my grandfather had built. She knew about the tech patent from the 80s, the quiet fortune that had compounded in accounts I wasn't allowed to touch until I turned 27. And she made me promise, made me swear on her hospital bed, that I wouldn't tell them. Let them think what they want, baby. Let them show you who they are when they believe you have nothing. Then, when the time comes, you'll know exactly who deserves to stand beside you. I turned back toward the house. Through the glass doors, I could see them still laughing, still talking, still so sure of themselves. Jessica was showing Amanda something on her phone, probably another luxury purchase. Eric was pouring himself another glass of wine like he owned the place. Uncle Richard had his arm draped over the back of his chair, king of a table built on condescension. I walked back inside. The laughter died down just slightly as I sat down, but Jessica couldn't resist. Everything okay? Did they give you a payment plan? I smiled. Small, controlled. Just business. She snorted. Business. Right. What kind of business do you even have, Natalie? I folded my hands on the table, looked her directly in the eyes and said nothing. Because I didn't need to explain myself. Not to her. Not to any of them. The power wasn't in the reveal. It was in the fact that I had been sitting on it this whole time, watching them perform their cruelty, cataloging every insult, every dismissive laugh. Every moment they made me feel invisible. They thought I was weak. They thought I was defeated. What they didn't know was that I had been holding the keys to a kingdom they couldn't even imagine. And I was about to walk through the gates while they were still banging on the outside. Jessica turned back to Amanda, already bored with me. That's what I loved about them. They could humiliate you and forget about it in the same breath. But I didn't forget. I never forgot. And tomorrow, when I walked into that law office in Pioneer Tower and held that check in my hands, a check with more zeros than their collective net worth, I would finally understand what my mother meant. Not everyone deserves to know your worth. Some people deserve to watch you rise and realize, far too late, that they were never even in the same room. I took a bite of cold turkey and smiled to myself. They called me poor. They said I'd die forgotten. But the only thing dying tonight was their illusion of superiority. And I hadn't even started talking yet. The rest of dinner dragged on like a slow puncture wound. Brandon, my brother, spent 20 minutes talking about his crypto portfolio, like he was the next Warren Buffett. Even though I knew for a fact he'd lost 12,000. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. $1,000 last spring, and had to borrow money from Dad's life insurance payout to cover his mortgage. No one brought that up, of course. Failure was only funny when it was mine. Amanda bragged about her boutique marketing agency, which as far as I could tell meant she made Instagram posts for her friends' small businesses, and called it entrepreneurship. Eric talked about his new truck, which he'd financed at some predatory interest rate he didn't seem to understand. And Jessica, oh Jessica, she spent the entire dessert course planning a trip to Napa with her girlfriends, making sure everyone heard the price tag on the wine tour she'd booked. $400 a person, she said laughing. But honestly, you can't put a price on the experience, right, Natalie? She didn't even wait for me to respond. She never did. Aunt Linda brought out the pumpkin pie, her smile tight and performative. I worked so hard on this, she announced, as if we all hadn't watched her pull it out of a Costco box earlier. Uncle Richard poured himself another bourbon. Philip, my dad's brother, made a half-hearted toast about gratitude that everyone ignored. And Grandma Helen, the family matriarch, sat at the head of the table in silence, watching everything with sharp eyes that never missed a detail. She was the only one who didn't laugh when Jessica made her comments. The only one who looked at me like she saw something the others didn't. When dinner finally ended, I helped clear the plates because that's what I always did. I was the help. The one who scraped leftovers into Tupperware while they retired to the living room with their drinks. Rachel, my cousin and the only person in this family with a shred of decency, joined me in the kitchen. You okay? She asked quietly, loading the dishwasher. I shrugged. Same as always. She shook her head. I don't know how you stand it. They're brutal. I handed her a plate. You get used to it. She looked at me for a long moment, like she wanted to say something, but instead she just squeezed my shoulder. You're stronger than all of them combined. You know that, right? I smiled but didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't feel strong. I felt tired. Tired of being the punchline. Tired of watching people I shared DNA with treat me like I was an embarrassment. Tired of pretending it didn't cut me every single time. But tomorrow I would walk into that office, and everything would change. The next morning, I woke up in my little apartment in Southeast Portland. It wasn't much. A one-bedroom with creaky floors, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a kitchen where you could touch both walls at the same time if you stretched. The building was old, the heater rattled, and my neighbors upstairs fought loud enough that I knew all their business whether I wanted to or not. Jessica had been here once, 2 years ago, when she needed someone to watch her dog last minute. She'd walked in, looked around, and said, "Oh wow, this is cozy," in a voice that meant, "Oh wow, this is depressing." She never asked me to dog sit again. I made coffee in my $15 thrift store French press, and sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Portland in November was all gray skies and cold wind, the kind of weather that made you want to stay inside and hide. But I wasn't hiding today. Today I was walking into Pioneer Tower downtown, and I was walking out with proof that everything they believed about me was a lie. I dressed carefully. Not too nice. I didn't want to tip anyone off. Just my usual, a pair of jeans, boots, a jacket I'd bought on sale 3 years ago. I pulled my hair back, grabbed my bus pass, and headed out the door. The TriMet stop was 2 blocks away. I stood there in the cold, waiting, watching cars drive past, people heading to their jobs, their lives, their certainties. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Thinking about you today. Hope you're doing okay after last night." I smiled and typed back. "I'm good. Better than good, actually." She sent back a heart emoji. The bus arrived and I climbed on, tapping my pass. I found a seat in the back and watched the city roll by. Food carts. Powell's Books. Pioneer Courthouse Square. The streets I'd walked 1,000 times. The city that had raised me. That had watched me struggle and survive and stay quiet. But quiet didn't mean empty. Quiet didn't mean defeated. Quiet just meant I was listening. And I had heard every single word they'd said about me. The law office was on the 15th floor of Pioneer Tower. One of those buildings with marble lobbies and security desks and elevators that moved so smoothly you barely felt them. I walked in, gave my name to the receptionist, and waited. My hands were shaking just slightly. Not from fear. From something else. Anticipation, maybe. Vindication. "Miss Brooks?" Mr. Weber appeared in the doorway, tall and silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who looked like he'd been born in a 3-piece suit. "Please come in." I followed him into his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. You could see the Willamette River from here, the bridges stretching across it like stitches holding the city together. He gestured to a chair and I sat. He opened a leather folder on his desk, pulled out a document, and slid it across to me. "This is the finalized trust summary. As of today, all restrictions have been lifted. The full amount, $500 million, is now entirely under your control." I stared at the number on the page. 500 million. It didn't even look real. It looked like something from a movie, from someone else's life. But it wasn't someone else's life. It was mine. My grandfather, Thomas Brooks, had been a quiet genius. An engineer at Tektronix in the 80s, back when Portland was becoming a tech hub. He developed a component patent that ended up in nearly every piece of telecommunications equipment for 2 decades. He'd sold it, reinvested the earnings, built an empire in silence. And when he died, he left it all in a trust. Half to my father, half to my mother. My father had blown through his half before I was born. Bad investments, bad decisions, bad everything. My mother, though she'd been smart. She'd locked her half away, set conditions, made sure I couldn't touch it until I was 27 and had proven I could live without it. She wanted me to know struggle. To understand what it meant to build something from nothing. And when she died, she made me promise not to tell the family. Because she knew. She knew exactly what they were. Mr. Weber slid another document toward me. And this, he said with the faintest smile, is the ceremonial check. For your records. I looked down at it. My name. The date. And $500 million written out in ink. I picked it up, held it, felt the weight of the paper in my hands. It was just a piece of paper. But it was also everything. I walked out of that office with the check folded carefully in my bag, feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted into something solid for the first time in years. The rain had stopped, and the city looked washed clean, the streets gleaming under a sky that was starting to break open into pale afternoon light. I stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, watching people rush past with their coffee cups and briefcases, everyone moving like they had somewhere important to be. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone on anyone's timeline but my own. I could have called Jessica right then. Could have sent a photo of the check to the family group chat. Watched their phones light up with shock and scrambling excuses. But that would have been too easy, too immediate, too kind. Because the truth was, I didn't want to just show them the money. I wanted them to sit in their assumptions a little longer. I wanted them to keep talking, keep laughing, keep building their case against me until the foundation crumbled underneath them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. I took the bus home, same as always, tapping my pass and finding a seat near the back. An older woman sat across from me with grocery bags at her feet, and a teenager with headphones bobbed his head to music only he could hear. This was my city. These were my people. The ones who rode the bus not because they had to perform humility, but because this was life. Real life. The kind Jessica would never understand because she'd spent her whole existence measuring worth by price tags and square footage. When I got back to my apartment, I made myself tea, sat by the window, and just breathed. The check was in my bag. The money was in my account. And nothing about my life looked different from the outside, which was exactly the point. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica in the family group chat. Someone had started a thread about Christmas plans, and she was already taking charge. We should do something big this year, she wrote. Maybe rent a cabin at Mount Hood? I can look into places. Everyone can chip in. I stared at the message. Everyone can chip in. As if I had anything to chip in with. As if my contribution would even be noticed. Brandon replied first. Sounds good, I'm in. Amanda followed with a string of enthusiastic emojis. Eric sent a thumbs up. Aunt Linda wrote back, what a wonderful idea, Jessica. You always know how to bring the family together. I didn't respond. I never did in the group chat. I was the ghost in the thread, the name that stayed gray while everyone else's turned blue with participation. And they liked it that way. It meant they could plan around me, make decisions without me, and if I showed up, great. If I didn't, even better. But Rachel sent me a private message a few minutes later. You going to the Mount Hood thing? I wrote back. Probably not. She replied quickly. I don't blame you. Jessica's already talking about splitting costs and you know she'll make it weird. She always does. I smiled at my phone. Rachel got it. She was the only one who ever did. Her mom, Aunt Linda, was one of the worst offenders, but Rachel had somehow managed to grow up in that house and come out with empathy intact. It gave me hope, in a strange way, that decency wasn't completely genetic. That you could be surrounded by cruelty and still choose kindness. The next few days were quiet. I went to work at the nonprofit where I'd been volunteering part-time for the past 2 years. It was a small organization that helped formerly incarcerated women find housing and job training. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover groceries, but I'd never needed it to be more than that. I'd taken the job because it mattered, because I wanted to do something that wasn't about me, because my mother had always said that wealth without purpose was just hoarding. The women I worked with didn't care what car I drove or what neighborhood I lived in. They cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I helped them fill out applications and practice interview questions, and reminded them that their past didn't define their future. It was the only place I felt like myself. On Wednesday, my supervisor, a woman named Donna who had more heart than funding, called me into her office. Natalie, I need to talk to you about something. My stomach dropped. Was I being let go? Had I done something wrong? She gestured for me to sit. I've been trying to keep this place running on fumes for 5 years, she said, rubbing her temples. But we just lost our biggest grant. The city pulled funding. We've got maybe 3 months before we have to close the doors. I felt my chest tighten. Donna, no. This place is everything to so many people. I know, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. But I don't know what else to do. I've applied for every grant I can find. I've called every donor. No one's biting. I'm out of options. I sat there, staring at the chipped paint on her desk, the stacks of paperwork, the photos on the wall of women who'd graduated from the program and gone on to build real lives. This place had saved people. It was still saving people. And it was going to disappear because of budget cuts and bureaucracy and a system that didn't care. Unless it didn't have to. I looked up at Donna. What if I told you I could help? She blinked. Natalie, you're sweet, but unless you've got a rich uncle hiding somewhere, I don't think there's much anyone can do at this point. I almost laughed. A rich uncle? No. But I had something better. I have access to some funds, I said carefully. Private funds. If I could cover the budget gap, would that keep the doors open? She stared at me. What are you talking about? How much are we talking? I did the math in my head. To keep the nonprofit running, staffed and operational for the next 5 years, accounting for growth, maybe 2 million. Pocket change compared to what was sitting in my account. But to Donna, to this place, it was everything. I can cover it, I said. She laughed, but it was the confused kind, the kind that didn't know if this was a joke. Natalie, that's not funny. I'm serious, Donna. I can write a check today. She stopped laughing. Her face went pale. Are you messing with me right now? Because if you are, this is a really bad time. I'm not messing with you, I said quietly. I'm completely serious. She leaned forward, studying my face. Like she was trying to find the punchline. Where would you even get that kind of money? I didn't answer right away. I thought about my mother, about the trust, about the years of silence and strategy. Then I said, let's just say my family doesn't know me as well as they think they do. Donna sat back in her chair, stunned. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, I told her. Let me help. Let me do something that actually matters. She looked at me for a long time, and then slowly she nodded. Okay. Yes. God, yes. Thank you. I smiled. I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork. You'll have the funds by the end of the week. She stood up, came around the desk, and hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. I don't know who you are, she whispered, but you just saved a lot of lives. I hugged her back, and for the first time since my mom died, I felt like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. That night, I called Mr. Weber and set up the transfer. $2 million to the nonprofit, structured as an anonymous endowment, so Donna wouldn't have to explain where it came from. He didn't ask questions. He just made it happen. And the next morning, Donna called me, crying so hard she could barely speak. It went through, she said. Natalie, it actually went through. We're saved. I smiled into the phone. Good. Now get back to work. You've got women counting on you. She laughed through her tears. You're incredible. You know that? I didn't feel incredible. I felt like I'd finally done something my mother would be proud of. And that was enough. But while I was quietly changing lives, my family was still living in their bubble, completely unaware that the person they'd written off as a failure had just moved more money in a single day than they'd see in their entire lives combined. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because the thing about having resources is that you get to choose what you do with them. You can hoard them, flash them, use them as weapons. Or you can move in silence and let your actions speak. I chose the latter. But that didn't mean I was going to let them off the hook. It just meant I was playing a longer game. And they didn't even know the match had started. The weekend came, and with it another family obligation. This time it was brunch at Aunt Linda's, because apparently Thanksgiving hadn't been enough torture for 1 month. The group chat had been buzzing all week with details. Aunt Linda said she was trying a new recipe. Jessica said she'd bring mimosas. Brandon said he'd be late, because he had a golf thing. No one asked if I was coming. They just assumed I would, because I always did, like a dog that keeps returning no matter how many times it gets kicked. I almost didn't go. I was standing in my apartment Saturday morning, staring at my closet, thinking about all the ways I could spend my day that didn't involve watching my family perform their superiority for 2 hours. But then I thought about my mother, about her promise, about the way she'd made me swear I'd let them show me exactly who they were. And I realized this was part of it. This was the performance before the curtain dropped. So I went. I wore the same jeans I'd worn to Thanksgiving. The same boots. A different sweater, but one that was just as cheap, just as unremarkable. I didn't do my hair. I didn't wear makeup. I looked exactly like what they expected. Poor Natalie, struggling Natalie, the cautionary tale in human form. I took the bus to West Hills, transferred once, and walked the last 3 blocks uphill in the cold. Aunt Linda's house was the kind of place that showed up in real estate magazines. All windows and sharp angles, with a garden that required a landscaping crew, and a driveway that fit 4 cars comfortably. I walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. Amanda answered, already holding a mimosa even though it was barely 10 in the morning. Oh hey Natalie. Come in. Everyone's in the dining room. I stepped inside. The smell of coffee and expensive candles hit me immediately. Voices floated from the other room, loud and animated. I followed Amanda through the hallway, past the family photos where I appeared exactly twice, both times as a blurry figure in the background. The dining room was full. Jessica sat at one end of the table, laughing at something Eric had said. Brandon was scrolling through his phone. Aunt Linda was fussing over a fruit platter. Uncle Richard stood by the window with his coffee, looking out at the view like he owned the city below. Rachel was the only one who smiled when she saw me. She waved me over to the seat next to her, the only open spot at the table. I sat down, and Jessica glanced over. Oh good, you made it. We were just talking about the Mount Hood trip. I nodded but didn't say anything. Jessica continued. So we found this amazing cabin. 6 bedrooms, hot tub, the whole thing. It's $3,200 for the weekend, so if we split it between, let's see, she counted on her fingers, 8 people, that's $400 each. She looked directly at me. You're good for $400, right? The table went quiet. Not completely silent, but that pointed kind of quiet where everyone's still chewing and sipping but they're all listening. I could feel their attention like heat on my skin. I met Jessica's eyes. She had that look, that smug little smile that said she already knew my answer, already knew I'd squirm or make an excuse or quietly say I couldn't afford it, and she'd get to feel superior for another week. I took a sip of the water someone had poured for me. $400, I repeated. She nodded. Yeah. I mean, if that's too much, we can figure something out. Maybe you could, I don't know, cover groceries or something instead. Eric snorted. Or she could just stay home. No offense, Nat, but it's kind of a tight space anyway. Brandon didn't look up from his phone. Yeah, 8 people is already a lot. Jessica's smile widened. We just want to make sure everyone's comfortable. And we know money's tight for you, so no pressure. There it was. The setup. The tiny little trap they'd built where no matter what I said, I lost. If I said yes, they'd spend the whole trip making comments about how I'd probably had to scrape together the money. If I said no, I'd be the broke cousin who couldn't hang, and they'd talk about me the entire weekend. It was a game they'd perfected over years. But here's the thing about games. They only work if both people are playing by the same rules. And I wasn't. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and said, I'll think about it. Jessica blinked. That wasn't the answer she'd expected. You'll think about it? Yeah, I said. I've got some things coming up. I'll let you know. She exchanged a glance with Amanda, who shrugged. Okay, well, we kind of need to know soon because we have to put the deposit down. I nodded. Sure. I'll get back to you. And then I changed the subject. Aunt Linda, this coffee is great. What blend is it? Aunt Linda lit up, immediately distracted, and launched into a story about some organic Fairtrade farm she'd discovered. Jessica looked annoyed, but she let it go. For now. The rest of brunch was the usual parade of humble brags and thinly veiled insults. Jessica talked about her Tesla again. Eric mentioned his new boat, which I was 90% sure he'd financed at a rate that would bury him in 3 years. Amanda showed off pictures from a spa weekend she'd taken. Brandon talked about his crypto rebound, which I knew was a lie because Rachel had told me he'd lost even more money the previous week. Uncle Richard gave unsolicited advice about investments to anyone who'd listen. And Aunt Linda floated around the table, playing hostess, making sure everyone saw how perfect her life was. I sat there, quiet, eating my overpriced avocado toast, watching them perform. And the whole time, I thought about the check in my apartment. About the $2 million I'd just moved without blinking. About the $500 million sitting in my account, waiting. They had no idea. Not a single clue. And that was the most delicious part of all. After brunch, Rachel pulled me aside as people were starting to leave. "You okay?" she asked. "You seemed kind of distant." I smiled. "I'm fine." She studied my face. Jessica was being awful about the trip. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said. "It's not your fault." She hesitated. "Are you really thinking about going?" I shrugged. "Probably not. I've got other plans." She looked relieved. "Good. You don't need that kind of energy in your life." I hugged her. "You're the best, you know that?" She hugged me back. "So are you. Just don't let them make you feel small. You're worth 100 of them." If only she knew. I left Aunt Linda's house and walked back down the hill toward the bus stop. The air was crisp, the sky that particular shade of gray that made Portland feel like a watercolor painting. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica in the group chat. "Okay everyone, I need final headcount for Mount Hood by Wednesday. Please confirm ASAP so we can lock in the cabin." Brandon replied immediately. "I'm in." Amanda sent a thumbs up. Eric wrote confirmed. Aunt Linda added, "Can't wait. This is going to be such a special time together." I stared at the screen. They were already moving forward, already planning, already assuming I'd either say no or say yes and be the butt of every joke. I opened the text thread, started typing, then stopped. Not yet. Not like this. I had something better in mind. Because the thing they didn't understand about me, the thing they'd never bothered to learn, was that I didn't react. I responded. And there was a difference. Reacting was emotional, immediate, messy. Responding was strategic, measured, devastating. So I put my phone away, got on the bus, and rode home in silence, already planning my next move. They wanted a head count? They wanted confirmation? They were going to get something better. They were going to get a lesson. And by the time I was done, they'd realize that the person they'd spent years underestimating had been holding all the cards the entire time. They just hadn't been paying attention. And that, right there, was their first mistake. I spent the next 2 days thinking about my mother. Not in the sad, grieving way I usually did, but in the way you think about someone when you finally understand the gift they gave you. She died when I was 17. And for years I thought the worst part was losing her. But now I realized the worst part was that she never got to see me win. She never got to watch the family that dismissed her, that pitted her, that treated her like she married down when she chose my father, realize they'd been wrong about both of us. My mother, Catherine Brooks, had been the quiet one. The one who worked double shifts as a nurse while my father drank away his inheritance. The one who showed up to family events in practical shoes and clearance dresses while Linda wore designer labels. The one they smiled at with sympathy and talked about in whispers. Poor Catherine. She tries so hard. It's such a shame about her husband. What they didn't know was that my mother was smarter than all of them combined. She'd taken her half of my grandfather's trust and locked it away where my father's bad decisions couldn't touch it. She'd worked those double shifts not because she had to, but because she wanted me to see what real work looked like. What sacrifice meant. What it took to build something that lasted. The day before she died, she'd pulled me close in that hospital bed, her hands weak but her grip determined. She'd looked at me with eyes that were still sharp despite the pain, despite the morphine, despite everything. "Natalie," she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper, "they're going to treat you like you're less than them. Like you don't matter. Let them." I'd started to cry. "Mom, don't. Listen to me," she'd insisted. "Let them show you who they really are. And when the time comes, when you finally have access to everything your grandfather built, don't you dare apologize for it. Don't you dare make yourself small to make them comfortable. You hear me?" I'd nodded, tears streaming down my face. "And promise me something else," she'd said. "Promise me you'll use it for something good. Not to prove them wrong, that's just a bonus. Use it to do something that matters. To help people who actually need it." I'd promised. And then she'd smiled, squeezed my hand one last time, and closed her eyes. She was gone 6 hours later. I was 17, broke and utterly alone. The family had helped with the funeral costs, which they never let me forget. Linda had paid for the flowers and mentioned it at least a dozen times over the years. Richard had covered the burial plot, and somehow worked it into every conversation about financial responsibility. They treated my grief like another bill I couldn't afford to pay. But they'd also assumed that was it. That Catherine had left me nothing but medical debt and memories. They never asked about the trust. They never wondered if my grandfather's fortune had been split differently. They just assumed my father had burned through everything. And when he died 3 years after my mother, drunk and alone in a motel room in Eugene, they'd assumed that was the end of the Brooks family money. They were wrong. So for the past 10 years, I'd lived exactly like they expected. I'd gone to Portland State on scholarships and worked nights at a diner to pay for books. I'd graduated with a degree in social work that made Linda shake her head and say, "Such a caring field, but not very practical, is it?" I'd moved into the cheapest apartment I could find and furnished it with donations and sidewalk scores. I'd taken the bus everywhere. I'd shopped at thrift stores. I'd become invisible in plain sight. The family charity case, the one they invited out of obligation and ignored out of habit. And the whole time, I'd been sitting on a fortune that would make their collective heads spin. The trust had rules. I couldn't touch it until I was 27. I couldn't tell anyone about it. I had to prove financial independence first, which meant living on my own income, no matter how small, for at least 5 years. My mother had designed it that way. She wanted me to know struggle, to understand what most people lived with every day, to never forget where I came from, even when I had the power to go anywhere. And now, at 27, with the trust fully unlocked and $500 million sitting in my account, I understood exactly what she'd been preparing me for. Not wealth. Purpose. The question wasn't what I was going to buy. It was what I was going to build. But first, I had some unfinished business with the people who'd spent a decade making me feel worthless. Wednesday came, the deadline for Jessica's Mount Hood headcount. The group chat had been relentless. Jessica had sent 3 reminders, each one more passive-aggressive than the last. She'd even posted a poll with yes or no options, like we were voting on pizza toppings instead of a family trip designed to exclude me. I still hadn't responded. And my silence was driving her crazy. She sent me a private message that afternoon. "Hey Nat, just need to know about Mount Hood. The cabin owner needs the final count today. Can you let me know if you're coming?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "I can't make it. Have fun though." 3 dots appeared immediately. She was typing. The dots stopped. Started again. Stopped. Finally, a message came through. "Oh. Okay. Is everything all right?" I almost laughed. She didn't care if everything was all right. She just wanted to know if there was drama she could mine for content. Some story she could tell the family about poor Natalie and whatever crisis was keeping her from a weekend she couldn't afford anyway. "Everything's fine," I wrote back. "Just have other plans." The dots appeared again, faster this time. What kind of plans? And there it was. The nosiness disguised as concern. The inability to let me exist without explanation. I could have told her the truth right then. Could have said I was spending the weekend reviewing investment portfolios with my financial advisor. Could have mentioned the meeting I had scheduled with a philanthropic foundation about education funding. Could have sent her a screenshot of my bank balance just to watch her phone explode in her hand. But that wasn't the plan. So instead I wrote just personal stuff. "I'll tell you about it later." Her response came immediately. "Okay, well now I'm curious, lol." I turned my phone face down on the table and smiled. Let her be curious. Let her wonder. Let her spend the entire Mount Hood weekend thinking about what I was doing, who I was with, why I'd suddenly become too busy for family obligations. It would make what came next so much sweeter. That evening, I met with Mr. Weber again. This time at a restaurant downtown. A quiet place with low lighting, and a wine list that costs more than my monthly rent used to. He was already seated when I arrived, reading something on his tablet, a glass of red wine in front of him. "Natalie," he said, standing to greet me. "Please sit." I sat down, and a server appeared immediately to take my order. I asked for water. I wanted to stay sharp. Mr. Weber slid a folder across the table. I've drawn up the documents for the nonprofit endowment. Everything is finalized. The funds will be distributed quarterly, and Donna will have full discretion over allocation. I opened the folder, scanned the pages. It was perfect. Airtight. Anonymous. Thank you, I said. This means everything. He nodded. Your mother would be very proud of how you're handling this. I looked up. Did you know her well? He smiled, a little sad around the edges. I was her lawyer for 15 years. I watched her build that trust from nothing. Watched her protect it from your father's chaos. Watched her plan every detail for you. She was one of the most brilliant, determined people I've ever known. My throat tightened. She never got to see any of this. No, he said quietly. But she knew it was coming. She believed in you completely. That's why she made the rules so strict. She wanted you to be ready. I took a breath, steadied myself. I'm ready for the next part too. He raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I leaned forward. I want to set up a foundation. Something permanent. For women who've been underestimated, overlooked, told they'll never amount to anything. I want to fund education, businesses, opportunities. I want to build something that outlasts me. He smiled. That's a significant undertaking. I know. But I have significant resources. And I want to use them right. He pulled out his tablet, started taking notes. What kind of structure are you thinking? We spent the next hour mapping it out. A foundation with a $50 million initial endowment. Grants for women starting businesses. Scholarships for non-traditional students. Seed funding for nonprofits led by women of color. A mentorship network. Everything my mother never had. Everything I'd had to fight for. Everything the women I worked with at the nonprofit desperately needed. By the time we finished, it was dark outside, and my head was spinning with possibilities. This is going to change lives, Mr. Weber said, sliding the notes back into his briefcase. I know, I said. That's the point. He looked at me for a moment, something like pride in his expression. When do you want to announce it? I thought about Jessica's group chat. About the Mount Hood trip. About the years of humiliation and dismissal. Not yet, I said. I want to build it first. Get everything in place. Then we'll go public. He nodded. Understood. We shook hands, and I left the restaurant feeling lighter than I had in years. This was it. This was what my mother had been preparing me for. Not revenge, though that would be sweet. Not proving anyone wrong, though that was inevitable. But purpose. Legacy. Impact. The kind of success that didn't need to announce itself because the work spoke louder than words ever could. I walked through downtown Portland, past the food carts and the streetlights and the people hurrying home. The city felt different now. Or maybe I felt different. Like I was finally stepping into a version of myself I'd been rehearsing for a decade. My phone buzzed. Rachel. Hey, heard you're not doing Mount Hood. Want to get coffee this weekend instead? I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. Let's do Sunday. She sent back a smiley face. It'll be nice to hang out without the whole family circus. I put my phone away and kept walking. The family circus. That's exactly what it was. A performance of superiority, a carefully choreographed show where everyone knew their role. Jessica, the successful one. Brandon, the entrepreneurial one. Eric and Amanda, the fun ones. Linda and Richard, the generous hosts. And me, the failure. The struggle. The cautionary tale. Except I'd been writing a different script the whole time. And they had no idea the final act was about to begin. Sunday came, and I met Rachel at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, one of those places with exposed brick and overpriced lattes and baristas who looked like they were moonlighting from art school. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with 2 cups in front of her. Got you a vanilla latte, she said as I sat down. Remembered it's your favorite. You're the best, I said, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. She smiled, but it was tired. The kind of tired that came from being the emotional Switzerland in a family at war with itself. How are you? She asked. Really? I thought about the question. A week ago, I would have shrugged it off. Said I was fine. Kept up the act. But Rachel wasn't the enemy. She never had been. I'm good, I said. Actually, I'm better than good. She studied my face. Yeah, I said. Things are starting to come together. Like really come together. She leaned forward. Okay, you have to tell me more because you've had this look lately. Like you know something no one else does. I laughed. Maybe I do. Her eyes widened. Natalie Brooks, are you seeing someone? Is that what this is? No, I said, still laughing. It's not about a person. It's about me. I'm just finally figuring some things out. She sat back, sipping her coffee. Well, whatever it is, it looks good on you. You seem lighter. I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks for 10 years. And someone had finally told me I could put it down. How was brunch last week? I asked, changing the subject. After I left. She groaned. Oh God, it was so much worse. Jessica spent an hour talking about the Mount Hood trip and how exclusive it's going to be. My mom kept saying it's important for the family to bond, like we're some kind of cult. And Eric got drunk and started arguing with Brandon about cryptocurrency. It was a disaster. Sounds about right, I said. Rachel shook her head. I don't know how you've dealt with them for so long. They're brutal to you, and you just take it. I used to take it, I said. Not anymore. She looked at me, surprised. What does that mean? It means I'm done letting them define me, I said. I'm done being the person they decided I should be. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she finally said. It's about time. We talked for another hour about everything and nothing. Her job, my work at the nonprofit, the weather, plans for the holidays. It was easy, comfortable. The kind of conversation you could only have with someone who didn't need you to perform. When we finally stood to leave, she hugged me tight. I'm really glad you're my cousin, she said. You're one of the only real people in this family. I hugged her back. You too. As I walked home, I thought about what she'd said. Real people. That was the difference, wasn't it? Rachel was real. She didn't hide behind money or status or performance. She just existed honestly and openly. Everyone else was a character in their own story, playing a role they thought would impress people who didn't actually matter. But me? I'd spent 10 years being told I was playing the wrong role. And now I was about to show them I'd been the director all along. Monday morning, I woke up to chaos in the group chat. Jessica had sent a message at 6 in the morning, all caps. Mount Hood trip is confirmed. Deposit is paid. This is going to be amazing. Below it, a string of replies. Brandon with a fire emoji. Amanda with heart eyes. Eric with a gif of someone popping champagne. Linda with, can't wait to spend quality time with my favorite people. I scrolled through the messages, sipping my coffee, watching them hype each other up for a weekend that was still 3 weeks away. They were so excited. So sure this was going to be the highlight of their year. And not one of them had noticed that I hadn't just declined. I'd disappeared. No explanation. No excuse. Just a quiet exit that left a question mark where I used to be. That question mark was going to haunt them. Because people like Jessica, like Linda, like all of them, they needed to understand things. They needed neat categories and clear explanations. They needed to know where everyone stood so they could position themselves above it. But I wasn't giving them that anymore. I was a blank space in their narrative. And blank spaces made people nervous. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Miss Brooks, this is Caroline from Summit Real Estate. I'm calling about the property you inquired about last week. The estate in Lake Oswego. I sat up straighter. Yes, I remember. The seller has accepted your offer. Congratulations. We can move forward with closing whenever you're ready. I felt my heart skip. The property was a sprawling house on 2 acres, right on the lake, with views that looked like something out of a painting. I'd seen it online, called on a whim, made an offer that was 15% over asking just to make sure no one else got it. And now it was mine. That's wonderful, I said, keeping my voice steady. Let's move quickly. I'd like to close within 2 weeks if possible. Absolutely, Caroline said. I'll have the paperwork drawn up today. I hung up and stared out the window. Lake Oswego. The same neighborhood where Grandma Helen lived. The same zip code Jessica always bragged about wanting to move to someday. And I'd just bought a house there. In cash. Without blinking. I could already see it. The day they found out. The shock. The confusion. The desperate scrambling to understand how the family failure had suddenly leapfrogged over all of them into a tax bracket they could only fantasize about. It was going to be perfect. But not yet. First, I had to let them have their Mount Hood trip. Let them take their photos and post their stories and convince themselves they were living their best lives. Because the higher they climbed on that little mountain of self-satisfaction, the harder they were going to fall when the ground shifted beneath them. And I was about to move the entire foundation. The Mount Hood trip came and went, and my phone was mercifully quiet for 3 days. No group chat messages. No passive-aggressive texts from Jessica. No photos of them posing in front of a cabin I wasn't invited to. It was peaceful. I spent that weekend closing on the Lake Oswego property, signing papers in Mr. Weber's office while they were probably sitting in a hot tub somewhere, congratulating themselves on their successful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. By Monday, the photos started appearing. Jessica posted at least 20 pictures on Instagram. The cabin at sunset. A spread of charcuterie that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to. Everyone in matching pajamas, because apparently they'd coordinated that. The caption read, "Nothing beats quality time with the people who matter most," with a string of heart emojis. I didn't like it. Didn't comment. Didn't acknowledge it at all. But I noticed that Rachel wasn't in any of the photos. I texted her. "How was the trip?" Her response came immediately. "Exhausting." They spent the whole weekend talking about money and making jokes about people who aren't financially stable. I left early. Came home yesterday. I felt my jaw. I'm sorry." She sent back a shrugging emoji. "It's fine. I'm used to it. But honestly, Nat, I don't know how much longer I can do these family things. They're getting worse." They were getting worse. Or maybe I was just finally seeing them clearly. Either way, the clock was ticking down to a reckoning they didn't see coming. That Wednesday, I got a call from Donna at the nonprofit. "Natalie," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You need to come down here." "Why? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Just come." I drove over in my old Honda, parked in the small lot behind the building, and walked in through the back door. The main room was full. All the women from our current cohort, about 15 of them, standing there with Donna in the center. When I walked in, they started clapping. I froze. "What is this?" Donna stepped forward, her eyes wet. "We wanted to thank you. Properly. What you did, the funding you secured, it's not just keeping the lights on. It's changing lives." One of the women, Maria, a single mother of 3 who'd been working her way through our job training program, came forward. She was holding something. A framed photo. She handed it to me, and I looked down at it. It was a picture of all of them, standing in front of the building, holding a banner that read, "Thank you for believing in us." My throat closed up. "I didn't do anything special," I managed to say. "Yes, you did," Donna said. "You saw something worth saving, and you saved it. That's everything." I looked around at their faces. Women who'd been incarcerated, who'd been homeless, who'd been told they were worthless and would never amount to anything. Women who reminded me of my mother. Of me. Of everyone who'd ever been underestimated and counted out. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice shaking. "We're going to do so much more." They clapped again, and I had to turn away to wipe my eyes. This was what mattered. Not the mansion in Lake Oswego. Not the trust fund. Not proving my family wrong. These women. This work. Everything else was just noise. I stayed for another hour, talking with the women, hearing their stories, their progress, their dreams. When I finally left, I felt full in a way I hadn't in years. Like I was finally using my life for something that mattered. My phone buzzed as I got in my car. A text from Jessica. "Family dinner at Grandma's this Sunday. You coming?" I stared at the message. Sunday. 4 days away. I could feel it, the weight of what was coming. The moment I'd been building toward for 10 years. The final act. I wrote back. "I'll be there." Her response was almost instant. "Great. It's been a while since we've all been together. Can't wait to catch up." I put my phone down and started the car. She had no idea what she was about to walk into. None of them did. Because this wasn't just another family dinner. This was the night everything changed. Sunday arrived cold and gray, typical Portland December weather. I stood in my apartment that morning, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For years, I dressed down for family events. Made myself smaller. Less threatening. Less visible. But not today. Today, I wore a black dress I'd bought earlier that week. Simple, elegant, expensive. I did my hair. Put on makeup. Wore the diamond earrings that had been my mother's, the ones I'd kept in a drawer for a decade because I was afraid someone would ask where I got them. I looked like money. Not new money, not flashy money, but the kind of quiet wealth that didn't need to announce itself. I drove to Grandma Helen's house in Lake Oswego, taking the long way past my new property. The house was still empty, but the landscaping crew had already started work. In a few weeks, it would be perfect. I pulled up to Grandma's house at exactly 6 o'clock. Cars were already parked in the driveway. Jessica's Tesla, Brandon's Audi, Eric's truck. I parked my Honda right in the middle of them, a rust bucket among show ponies. I grabbed my bag, took a breath, and walked to the front door. Grandma Helen answered, her sharp eyes taking me in from head to toe. She didn't say anything, but something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Or understanding. Natalie, she said. You look lovely. Thank you, Grandma. I stepped inside. The house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary. Voices came from the dining room, loud and animated. I followed Grandma down the hallway, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. When I walked into the dining room, the conversation stopped. Jessica looked up from her phone, and her eyes went wide. She recovered quickly, but I saw it. The surprise. The confusion. Wow, Natalie, she said. You look different. I smiled. Thank you. Amanda was staring at my dress. Is that new? I sat down in the empty chair across from her. It is. Where'd you get it? I named a boutique downtown, the kind of place where a single dress cost what she probably spent on her monthly car payment. Her mouth opened slightly. Oh, that place is expensive. I just shrugged. It was worth it. Brandon was looking at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You doing okay, Nat? You seem different. I'm good, I said. Really good, actually. Aunt Linda came in from the kitchen, carrying a platter of roasted vegetables. Oh, Natalie, I'm so glad you could make it. We've missed you. I smiled politely but didn't respond. Eric leaned back in his chair. So what have you been up to? Feels like we haven't seen you in forever. Just working, I said. Staying busy. Jessica jumped in. The nonprofit thing, right? That's sweet. Do they pay you yet, or is it still volunteer? It pays, I said. Enough. She exchanged a glance with Amanda. Well, that's good. Everyone needs something. The condescension was thick enough to cut. But I just smiled and accepted the plate Grandma handed me. The dinner progressed like all the others. They talked about themselves. Jessica's new client. Brandon's crypto gains, which I still didn't believe. Eric's boat, which he'd apparently taken out exactly once. Amanda's boutique, which seemed to be hemorrhaging money based on the vague way she described its performance. Aunt Linda and Uncle Richard talked about a vacation they were planning to Italy. And I sat there, eating quietly, saying little, watching them perform. Then Uncle Richard turned to me. So Natalie, what are your plans? Long term, I mean. You can't work at a nonprofit forever. I set down my fork. Why not? He blinked. Well, I mean, it's admirable and all, but there's no real future in it. No growth. You should be thinking about something more stable. Something with a retirement plan. Jessica nodded. He's right. You should look into corporate work. I have connections. I could probably get you an interview somewhere. She said it like she was offering me a lifeline. Like I should be grateful. I looked at her. That's kind, but I'm fine where I am. Brandon scoffed. Come on, Nat. You're almost 30. You've got to think about your future. Savings. Property. Security. I took a sip of water. I appreciate the concern. Amanda leaned forward. We're just trying to help. We've all done well for ourselves, and we want the same for you. The same for me. Like I was some charity project. Like I needed their pity and their guidance to make something of myself. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I could feel it building, the tension, the assumption, the absolute certainty that they were better than me. I set my glass down. Actually, I said, my voice calm, I've been meaning to tell you all something. The table went quiet. Jessica's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What's that? I've made some changes recently. Some big ones. And I wanted you to hear it from me. Grandma Helen was watching me from the head of the table, her expression unreadable. What kind of changes? Aunt Linda asked, her voice cautious. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single piece of paper. The ceremonial check from Mr. Weber's office. $500 million. I slid it across the table toward the center, where everyone could see it. Financial changes, I said. For a moment nobody moved. They all just stared at the check like it was written in a foreign language. Then Jessica picked it up. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the number. Looked at my name. Looked back at the number. What is this? She whispered. It's a trust fund, I said. From my grandfather. It became accessible when I turned 27. Brandon grabbed the check from her. This is fake. It has to be. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and turned the screen toward them. The balance was right there. 500 million, minus the few million I'd already allocated to the nonprofit and the foundation. It's not fake, I said. Brandon's face went white. Eric actually stood up from his chair. What the hell, Natalie? Amanda was shaking her head. No, this doesn't make sense. You've been broke. You take the bus. You live in that apartment. I did all those things, I said. Because I wanted to. Not because I had to. Jessica's voice came out strangled. You've had this the whole time? Not the whole time, I said. Just the last few months. But the trust has been there since my mom died. I just couldn't access it until now. Aunt Linda's face had gone red. Catherine never said anything. She wouldn't have. I met her eyes. Mom wanted me to understand what real life was like. She didn't want me to be like you. The insult hung in the air. Uncle Richard slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. You don't get to come in here and insult us. I stood up. I'm not insulting you. I'm telling you the truth. You've spent 10 years treating me like I was less than you. Like I was a failure. Like I was something to pity. And the whole time, I was sitting on more money than all of you combined will ever see. The room was silent. Brandon sat back down heavily. Jessica was still holding the check, staring at it like it might disappear. And you know what the worst part is? I continued. I gave you so many chances to just be kind. To just treat me like family. But you couldn't do it. You had to mock me. Had to make yourselves feel superior. So now you get to live with the fact that the person you look down on has been above you this entire time. Grandma Helen spoke for the first time. She's right. Everyone turned to her. You all should be ashamed, she said, her voice hard. I've watched you treat this girl like garbage for years. And now you're surprised she didn't share her good fortune with you? Why would she? Jessica's eyes were filling with tears. Grandma, we didn't know. That's the problem, Grandma said. You didn't ask. You didn't care. You just assumed. And now you're paying the price for your assumptions. I picked up my bag. I'm leaving. But before I go, I want you to know something. I bought a house last week. In Lake Oswego. 2 acres right on the water. I'll be moving in next month. So if you drive through the neighborhood, you might see me. But don't bother stopping by. You're not invited. I walked toward the door. Rachel, who'd been sitting silently at the far end of the table, stood up. Natalie, wait. I turned. Rachel walked over to me. Can I come with you? I looked at her. Her eyes were sincere. She'd never been part of the cruelty. She'd always been the one voice of reason in a family that had none. Of course, I said. She grabbed her coat, and we walked out together. Behind us, I could hear voices rising. Jessica crying. Brandon yelling. Aunt Linda trying to restore order. But I didn't look back. Rachel and I got into my car, and I started the engine. She was quiet for a moment. Then she started laughing. Oh my God, she said. Oh my God, Natalie. That was incredible. I smiled. It needed to happen. She shook her head, still laughing. $500 million. You've been sitting on $500 million and driving a 2008 Honda Civic. The Honda runs fine, I said. She looked at me. You're amazing. You know that. I pulled out of the driveway. I'm just done being small. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Rachel asked, "What are you going to do now?" I thought about the foundation, the nonprofit, the house in Lake Oswego, the life I was building that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong, and everything to do with doing something right. I'm going to live, I said. Really live. For the first time in 10 years. She smiled. Good. You deserve it. I dropped Rachel off at her apartment, and she hugged me before getting out. Thank you for letting me escape that disaster, she said. Anytime. She paused. You're still going to talk to me, right? Even now that you're a gazillionaire? I laughed. Yes, Rachel. You're safe. She grinned. Good. Because you're the only one in this family worth knowing. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the city. Portland at night was beautiful. The lights reflecting off the wet streets. The bridges lit up over the river, the quiet hum of a city winding down. I thought about my mother. About the promise I'd made to her. About the way she'd planned everything so carefully, so deliberately, to make sure I turned out exactly like this. Strong. Independent. Unshakable. When I got home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and looked out at the city. My phone was blowing up. Texts from Jessica. From Brandon. From Aunt Linda. Even one from Uncle Richard. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. I knew what they said. Apologies that weren't real apologies. Explanations that were just excuses. Attempts to backtrack and rewrite history. But you can't rewrite what's already been written. And they'd written their story with me in permanent ink. Now they had to live with it. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Mr. Weber. The foundation paperwork was finalized. $50 million allocated. The board was assembled. We were ready to start accepting applications. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Started drafting the mission statement. We believe in women who've been told they can't. Women who've been underestimated. Women who've been counted out. We believe in second chances and first opportunities. We believe that your past doesn't define your future, and your circumstances don't determine your worth. We believe in you. I read it over. Edited it. Read it again. It was perfect. It was my mother. It was me. It was every woman who'd ever been dismissed and decided to rise anyway. I hit send. The foundation was live. By noon, the applications started coming in. Women from Portland. From across Oregon. From around the country. Women who needed help starting businesses. Going back to school. Escaping bad situations. Building futures they'd been told were impossible. I read every single one. And I cried. Because this was it. This was what $500 million was supposed to do. Not sit in an account. Not buy things I didn't need. But change lives. Build futures. Prove that the people who get counted out are often the ones worth counting on the most. My phone rang. Rachel, did you see Jessica's Instagram? She asked. No. Why? She posted this long thing about family and forgiveness, and how we should all support each other. It's so fake. I rolled my eyes. Of course she did. Rachel laughed. Everyone's talking about it. The whole family's in meltdown mode. They're trying to figure out how to get back in your good graces. There's no getting back, I said. That bridge is burned. Good, Rachel said. They don't deserve you. We talked for a few more minutes, and then I hung up and went back to the applications. This was my life now. Not family drama. Not proving points. Just work that mattered. A week later, the local news picked up the story about the foundation. Not because I'd reached out, but because one of the first grant recipients had told a reporter about it. Suddenly, I was getting calls. Interview requests. People wanting to know who I was, where the money came from, why I was doing this. I did one interview. Just one. With a journalist from the Oregonian, who seemed genuinely interested in the work, not just the spectacle. She asked me why I'd stayed quiet about the trust for so long. Because I wanted to know who people really were, I told her. When they thought I had nothing. And what did you learn? She asked. I learned that the people who love you when you're struggling are the only ones worth keeping when you're not. The article came out on a Sunday. By Monday morning, it had gone viral. Not because of the money, but because of the message. Women everywhere were sharing it, tagging friends, saying this is us. This is our story. Jessica called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Natalie, I saw the article. I just want you to know I'm really proud of you. And I'm sorry if we ever made you feel bad. We were just joking around. You know that, right? It was never serious. I deleted it without listening to the whole thing. Brandon texted. Hey, I know things got weird at dinner, but we're still family. We should talk. I blocked the number. Aunt Linda sent an email. A long one, full of backpedaling and revisionist history about how she'd always believed in me, always known I'd do great things, always supported me even when it didn't seem like it. I marked it as spam, because the thing about burning bridges is that you have to commit. You can't sort of burn them. You can't leave a little path back just in case. You have to let them fall completely. And I had. The only person I stayed in touch with was Rachel. And Grandma Helen, who called me a week after the dinner. I'm proud of you, she said. Your mother raised you right. Thank you, Grandma. And for what it's worth, she continued, I should have stepped in sooner. Should have stopped them from treating you that way. You were dealing with your own stuff, I said. She sighed. That's no excuse. But I'm glad you found your way. Me too. By December, the foundation had awarded its first round of grants. 15 women. 15 futures changed. I went to the award ceremony, held in a small community center in Northeast Portland. The women stood up one by one and told their stories. Single mothers, formerly incarcerated women, immigrants, survivors, women who'd been told no 1,000 times and were finally hearing yes. I sat in the back and watched, and I thought about my mother, about how she'd died in a hospital bed, exhausted and broke, but determined to give me something better. She'd given me everything. Not just money, but perspective, purpose, the understanding that real wealth isn't what you have. It's what you do with it. After the ceremony, one of the women came up to me. Her name was Patricia. She'd received a grant to start a catering business. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what this means. I smiled. I think I do. She shook her head. No, you don't. I was sleeping in my car 2 months ago. My kids were in foster care. I had nothing. And now, because of you, I have a chance. I have hope. My throat tightened. That's all you, Patricia. You did the work. You just gave me the opportunity, she said. That's everything. We hugged. And I had to turn away to wipe my eyes. This was everything. This moment. This work. This life I was building that had nothing to do with my family's expectations, and everything to do with my mother's dreams. I drove home that night past my old apartment, past the neighborhoods I used to walk through counting pennies, past the life I used to live. And I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful. Because struggle had taught me something wealth never could. It taught me empathy. It taught me resilience. It taught me that the people society overlooks are often the ones with the most to offer. And now I had the resources to prove it. Christmas came. I didn't go to any family events. I spent the day at the nonprofit, serving dinner to the women in the program. Jessica sent a gift. I donated it unopened. Brandon sent a card. I recycled it without reading it. Aunt Linda tried calling. I let it go to voicemail. Because forgiveness isn't something you owe people just because they're related to you. Forgiveness is something you give when it's earned. And they hadn't earned it. They'd spent 10 years showing me exactly who they were. And I'd finally stopped making excuses for them. On New Year's Eve, I stood on the deck of my new house in Lake Oswego. The one I'd bought in cash. The one they didn't know about until I told them. The lake stretched out before me, dark and still, reflecting the lights from the houses around it. Fireworks started going off in the distance, colors blooming in the sky. And I thought about the year ahead. The foundation was growing. The nonprofit was thriving. I was building something that would outlast me. Something that mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Happy New Year, cousin. Proud of you. I smiled and wrote back. Happy New Year. Proud of us. Because that was the truth. The people who'd stood by me, who'd seen me at my lowest and stayed, those were the people worth celebrating. Everyone else was just noise. At midnight, I poured myself a glass of champagne and raised it to the sky. To my mother, who'd given me everything. To the women I was helping, who reminded me why it mattered. To myself for finally understanding that being underestimated was never a weakness. It was a gift. Because it meant that when I finally rose, no one saw it coming. And by the time they did, I was already so far above them they couldn't even see me anymore. I took a sip and smiled. They'd said I'd die poor and forgotten. But I wasn't poor. I wasn't forgotten. I was free. And that, in the end, was worth more than $500 million could ever buy. The fireworks continued. The year turned over. And I stood there, in my house, in my life, in my truth. Finally, completely, unapologetically myself. They never saw me coming. But I'd been there all along. And now, they'd spend the rest of their lives wondering how they missed it. How they missed me. But I didn't wonder. I knew exactly how. They were too busy looking down on me to notice I was climbing. And by the time they looked up, I was already gone. January brought cold mornings and clear skies, the kind of weather that made Portland feel sharp and awake. I started each day in my new house, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the lake. The water turned from black to silver to blue, and I never got tired of it. This was my life now. Quiet. Intentional. The foundation was receiving more applications than we could process. Women from every corner of the country, every background imaginable, all with the same story. They'd been told no. They'd been dismissed. They'd been underestimated. And now they were asking for a chance. I hired a team to help manage it. 3 women, all of whom had their own stories of climbing out of impossible situations. We met twice a week in a small office space I'd rented in downtown Portland, reviewing applications, conducting interviews, making decisions that would change lives. It was the best work I'd ever done. One afternoon in late January, I was sitting in that office when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. This is Natalie. Miss Brooks, this is Detective Angela Reyes with the Portland Police Bureau. I need to speak with you about a family matter. My stomach dropped. Is someone hurt? Not exactly, she said. But we have a situation involving your brother, Brandon Brooks. He's been arrested for fraud. I closed my eyes. Of course he had. What kind of fraud? Investment fraud, she said. He's been running a cryptocurrency scheme. Took money from at least 30 people, promising returns that never materialized. We're estimating the total loss at around $400,000. I sat back in my chair. Why are you calling me? Because several of the victims have mentioned that he used your name, the detective said. Told people you were backing his venture. That you'd invested significantly. That your success gave him credibility. My jaw tightened. I never gave him permission to do that. I understand, she said. And we're not investigating you. But we need a statement confirming you had no involvement. I can come to the station tomorrow, I said. She gave me the details and we hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. Brandon had used my name. Had dragged me into his mess. Had tried to profit off the very success he'd mocked me for not having. It was almost impressive in its audacity. Almost. I called Mr. Weber. He answered on the second ring. We have a problem, I said. 20 minutes later, I was in his office, laying out the situation. He listened carefully, taking notes, his expression neutral. This is problematic, he said when I finished. But manageable. We'll issue a public statement clarifying that you have no business relationship with your brother, and never authorized the use of your name. We'll cooperate fully with the investigation. That should insulate you. What about him? I asked. Brandon, I mean. What's going to happen? Mr. Weber leaned back in his chair. If the charges stick, he's looking at significant jail time. Fraud at this level is a felony. He could get 10 years. I should have felt something. Sympathy maybe. Concern. But all I felt was tired. He did this to himself. He did, Mr. Weber agreed. And unfortunately, he tried to do it using you. That's going to make it worse for him. Good, I said. Then I caught myself. Is that terrible? That I don't feel bad for him? Mr. Weber smiled faintly. You're allowed to protect yourself, Natalie. Even from family. Especially from family. The news broke 2 days later. Local businessman arrested for investment fraud. Brandon's mugshot was all over the internet. The story detailed his scheme, the victims, the money. And buried in the third paragraph was a line about how he'd falsely claimed connections to a prominent local philanthropist, later identified as his sister. My phone exploded. Texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old classmates. Distant relatives. Even a few journalists looking for a comment. I ignored all of them. Except one. Jessica. She called 4 times before I finally answered. "What do you want?" "Natalie," she said, her voice shaking. "Have you seen the news? About Brandon?" "Yes." She was crying. "This is a disaster. The whole family is humiliated. He used your name. He lied to people." "That's not my problem," I said. "But it affects all of us," she said. "People are going to think we're all like him." "Then maybe you should have paid more attention to who he actually was," I said. "Instead of just assuming he was successful because he said so." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to help him?" "No. Natalie, he's our brother." "He's also a criminal," I said. "He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. But he's family." I laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. "Family? You're really going to play that card now? After everything? What are you talking about? You spent years treating me like I was worthless," I said. "You mocked me. You dismissed me. You made me feel like I didn't belong. And now you want me to save Brandon because we share DNA?" She was crying harder now. "We didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I said. "You meant every word. And now you're facing consequences, and suddenly family matters." "Well, I'm sorry, Jessica. But I'm not your safety net." I hung up. My hands were shaking. I sat down on the couch and took a deep breath. This was harder than I thought it would be. Setting boundaries. Holding the line. But it was necessary. Because if I gave in now, if I helped Brandon just because he was blood, I'd be right back where I started. Small. Invisible. Useful only when they needed something. The next week, I gave my statement to the police. It was straightforward. I had no involvement in Brandon's business. I never authorized him to use my name. I had no knowledge of his activities. The detective thanked me and said I was free to go. As I was leaving the station, I ran into someone I didn't expect. Uncle Philip. My father's brother. He was sitting in the waiting area, looking older than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood up. "Natalie." "Uncle Philip. Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a minute." I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped outside into the cold. He shoved his hands in his pockets. "I heard. About Brandon. I'm sorry you got dragged into it." I didn't say anything. He sighed. "I also heard about the trust. About the money. I guess I'm not surprised Catherine set it up that way. She always was smarter than the rest of us." "Why are you here?" I asked. He looked at me. "To apologize." "For what?" "For everything," he said. "For not stepping in when Linda and Richard treated you like garbage. For letting Jessica and Brandon act like you were beneath them. For not being there after Catherine died." I crossed my arms. "Okay. That's it." He asked. "That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say?" I asked. "That it's fine? That I forgive you? Because I don't." He nodded slowly. "I understand. But I want you to know I regret it. All of it." I looked at him. My father's brother. The man who could have been a support system, and chose to be a bystander instead. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "But it doesn't change anything." "I know." We stood there in silence for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, your mother would be proud of you." I felt my throat tighten. But I kept my voice steady. "I know she would." He nodded again. Then turned and walked back into the station. I stood there for a moment, watching him go. Then I got in my car and drove home. Because apologies were nice. But they didn't erase years of harm. And I didn't owe anyone forgiveness just because they'd finally realized they were wrong. February came, and with it, the first major event for the foundation. A gala fundraiser at a hotel in downtown Portland. We'd invited donors, community leaders, local business owners. The goal was to raise additional funds and raise awareness. I almost canceled it 3 times. I hated being the center of attention. Hated the idea of standing in front of people and talking about myself. But this wasn't about me. It was about the work. So I went. I wore a navy dress, simple and elegant. Did my hair and makeup. Wore my mother's earrings. When I arrived at the hotel, the ballroom was already filling up. There were at least 200 people there. I recognized some faces. Donna from the nonprofit. Patricia, the woman who'd started the catering business. Several of the grant recipients. And in the back, standing near the bar, was Rachel. She waved when she saw me, and I made my way over. "You look amazing," she said, hugging me. "So do you." She grinned. "This is incredible, Nat, look at what you've built." I looked around the room. At the people gathered. At the banners with the foundation's name. At the program booklets on every table. "It doesn't feel real," I admitted. "It's real," she said. "And you deserve it." The event started, and I gave a speech. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I talked about my mother. About the women we were helping. About why this work mattered. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood up. Some were crying. I stepped off the stage, and Patricia came up to me immediately. "That was beautiful," she said. "Thank you." We raised over $300,000 that night. Enough to fund another year of grants. Enough to expand the program. Enough to prove that people cared about this work as much as I did. At the end of the night, I stood by the windows overlooking the city. Rachel came up beside me. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Exhausted," I said. "But good." She smiled. "You should be proud." "I am," I said. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." March brought the sentencing hearing for Brandon. I didn't go. But Rachel did, and she called me afterward. "He got 6 years," she said. "With the possibility of parole after 4. I was silent. "How did he look?" "Broken," she said. "He tried to give a statement. Talked about how he'd made mistakes. How he was sorry. But the judge wasn't having it. The victims gave statements too. Some of them lost their retirement savings. I felt a pang of something. Not quite sympathy. But not satisfaction either. Just sadness. That it had come to this. That my brother, the person who'd grown up in the same house as me, had turned into someone who'd hurt people for money. "Do you think he'll be okay?" I asked. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I think this might be the wake-up call he needed." Maybe. We hung up, and I sat with the news for a while. 6 years. It felt like a lifetime. But it also felt like justice. The people he'd hurt deserved accountability. And maybe, just maybe, this would force him to look at himself and figure out who he actually wanted to be. A week later, I got a letter. From Brandon. It was short. Handwritten. "Natalie, I know I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness. I know I messed up. Not just with the fraud, but with everything. The way I treated you. The things I said. I was jealous. I think I always have been. You had something I didn't. Integrity. Purpose. And instead of learning from you, I resented you for it. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And I'm going to spend the next few years trying to become someone who deserves a second chance. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're happy. You deserve it more than anyone. Brandon." I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't write back. Not because I was being cruel, but because I didn't know what to say. Sorry wasn't enough. It didn't undo the damage. Didn't repair the years of cruelty. But it was something. And maybe, in a few years when he'd done the work, we could have a conversation. Maybe. But not today. April brought warmth and cherry blossoms. Portland came alive, and so did I. The foundation was thriving. We'd funded over 50 women by then. Businesses. Education. Fresh starts. The nonprofit had doubled its capacity. We were helping more women than ever. And I was finally truly happy. One Saturday morning, I was working in the garden at my Lake Oswego house when a car pulled into the driveway. I didn't recognize it at first. Then the door opened, and Grandma Helen stepped out. I stood up, wiping dirt off my hands. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" She smiled. "I wanted to see the house. You've been avoiding family events, so I thought I'd come to you." I laughed. Fair enough. Come on, I'll give you the tour. We walked through the house together. She admired the open kitchen, the view of the lake, the way the light came through the windows. When we finished, we sat on the back deck with tea. This is beautiful, Natalie, she said. You've done well. Thank you. She looked at me. How are you? Really? I thought about the question. I'm good, I said. Better than I've been in years. She nodded. I can see that. You look lighter. I feel lighter, I admitted. Like I've finally figured out who I'm supposed to be. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Your mother knew who you were all along. That's why she set up the trust the way she did. I know, I said. And I'm grateful. Even when it was hard, I'm grateful. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grandma said, I'm proud of you. Not just for the money. For the choices you've made. For the person you've become. I felt tears prick my eyes. That means a lot, Grandma. She smiled. You remind me of Catherine. Strong. Smart. Kind. But tougher than people give you credit for. I laughed through the tears. I had to be. With this family? She laughed too. Fair point. Before she left, Grandma turned to me. Have you thought about reconciling with any of them? Jessica, maybe? Or Linda? I shook my head. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm also not interested in pretending things are different than they are. She nodded. I understand. Just know that if you ever change your mind, the door is open. I appreciate that, I said. But I don't think I will. She hugged me. Then you do what's right for you. That's all anyone can ask. I watched her drive away. And I felt at peace. Because I'd made my choice. I'd drawn my boundaries. And I was finally living a life that was mine. Not dictated by family expectations. Not shaped by other people's opinions. Just mine. May brought the 1-year anniversary of my mother's trust becoming accessible. 1 year since that dinner at Aunt Linda's. 1 year since the phone call that changed everything. I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't been in months. I brought flowers. Sat down on the grass beside her headstone. Hey Mom, I said. I thought you'd want to know how things turned out. I told her about the foundation. About the women we'd helped. About the house. About the family and how I'd finally walked away from the people who'd hurt me. I told her about Brandon. About Jessica. About all of it. And then I told her the most important thing. I kept my promise, I said. I used it for something good. I didn't let the money change me. I let it amplify who I already was. I think you'd be proud. The wind picked up, rustling the trees around me. And I felt, for just a moment, like she was there. Like she was listening. Like she was proud. I stayed for an hour. Then I stood up, kissed my fingers, and pressed them to her headstone. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. I drove home slowly, taking in the city I loved. The city that had raised me. The city where I'd struggled and survived and finally thrived. And I realized something. They'd said I'd die poor and forgotten. But I wasn't poor. I wasn't forgotten. I was wealthy beyond measure. Not because of the money, but because I'd learned what actually mattered. People. Purpose. Impact. The rest was just noise. June brought summer and long days. And the kind of warmth that made you want to stay outside until the sun finally set at 9 o'clock. The foundation was expanding again. We were opening a second office in Seattle. Hiring more staff. Reaching more women. And I was busier than I'd ever been. But it was the good kind of busy. The kind that filled you up instead of draining you. One evening, I was at the office late, finishing up some paperwork, when my phone rang. Rachel. Hey, what's up? You sitting down? She asked. Why? Because I have news, she said. And you're going to want to hear this. I sat down. Okay. I'm sitting. Jessica got fired, Rachel said. I blinked. What? She got fired. From her marketing job. Apparently, she'd been inflating her numbers for months. Claiming clients she didn't actually have. They finally caught on and let her go. I didn't know what to say. When did this happen? Last week, Rachel said. She's been keeping it quiet. But my mom told me today. She's apparently devastated. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Not satisfaction. Not quite sympathy. Just a strange sense of inevitability. I guess karma exists, Rachel said. I guess so, I said quietly. There was a pause. Are you going to reach out to her? Rachel asked. No, I said. That's not my responsibility. I know, Rachel said. I just thought I'd ask. I appreciate it. But no. I'm done carrying other people's consequences. We talked for a few more minutes, and then we hung up. I sat there in the quiet office, thinking about Jessica, about how she'd spent so much time performing success that she'd forgotten to actually build it, about how desperation made people do stupid things. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that she'd never learned. But I wasn't going to save her. That wasn't my job. My job was to keep moving forward, to keep building, to keep helping the people who actually wanted to change. And that's exactly what I did. By the end of summer, the foundation had helped over 100 women. 100 lives changed. 100 futures rewritten. And every single one of them reminded me why I'd started this in the first place. One afternoon in late August, I was at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, working on my laptop when someone approached my table. Excuse me, are you Natalie Brooks? I looked up. It was a young woman, maybe early 20s, with nervous energy and hopeful eyes. I am, I said. I'm sorry to bother you, she said quickly. But I just wanted to say thank you. I received a grant from your foundation last year. I was able to go back to school. I'm graduating next spring. I smiled. That's wonderful. What are you studying? Social work, she said. I want to help people the way you helped me. My throat tightened. That means everything, I said. She smiled, thanked me again and walked away. And I sat there, staring at my laptop, feeling the weight and the lightness of it all. This was legacy. This was impact. This was everything my mother had hoped for when she'd locked away that money and made me promise to use it right. I kept my promise. And I was going to keep keeping it. For the rest of my life. Because they'd said I'd die poor and forgotten. But I was going to die rich in the ways that mattered. Rich in purpose. Rich in impact. Rich in the knowledge that I'd used my life to lift other people up. And that, in the end, was the only kind of wealth worth having. The kind you couldn't deposit in a bank. The kind you couldn't spend. The kind that lived on long after you were gone. In the lives you'd changed. The futures you'd made possible. The women who'd been told they couldn't, and then did anyway. Because you believed in them. Because you gave them a chance. Because you remembered what it felt like to be counted out. And you refused to let anyone else feel that way if you could help it. That was my legacy. That was my life. And I'd built it from the ashes of every insult, every dismissal, every moment they'd tried to make me feel small. They thought they were burying me. But they were actually planting me. And now I was blooming in ways they'd never imagined. And I was never looking back. September brought cool mornings, and the kind of light that made everything look golden. I was sitting on my deck one Sunday morning, drinking coffee and watching the lake, when my phone buzzed. An email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." I opened it. "Dear Miss Brooks, you don't know me, but my name is Claire. I'm one of the women your foundation helped 2 years ago. I wanted to reach out because I just signed the lease on my first storefront. I'm opening a bakery. It's small, but it's mine. And none of it would have been possible without you. I was homeless when I applied for your grant. I was living in my car with my daughter, trying to keep her in school, trying to pretend everything was okay. Your foundation gave me $15,000 to complete a culinary program. You gave me hope when I had none. Now I'm standing in my own space, with my own business, with a future I never thought was possible. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for giving me a chance when no one else would. I'm going to pay it forward. I promise. I'm going to help other women the way you helped me. With gratitude, Claire." I read the email 3 times. Then I saved it in a folder I'd created called Why This Matters. There were over 50 emails in that folder now. Stories like Claire's. Women who'd been given a chance and had run with it. Women who were building futures and lifting others as they climbed. This was why I did it. This was why the money mattered. Not for what it bought, but for what it made possible. I wrote back to Claire. Congratulated her. Told her I was proud of her. Told her to send me the address of her bakery so I could visit. She replied within minutes, thanking me again, saying she'd love to see me, saying she'd name a pastry after me. I laughed out loud. This was joy. This was purpose. This was life. Later that day, Rachel came over. We sat on the deck with wine and watched the sun set over the water. This is nice, she said. It is, I agreed. She looked at me. You seem happy. I am happy, I said. Good, she said. You deserve it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rachel asked, do you ever regret it? Cutting them off. I thought about it. Honestly? No. She nodded. I get it. They were toxic. They still are, I said. And I'm allowed to protect myself from that. You are, she agreed. And for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Thank you, I said. We watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And I F2L'd, for maybe the first time in my life, completely at peace. Because I'd finally learned the most important lesson. You don't owe anyone access to your life. Not even family. Especially not family who've proven they'll use that access to hurt you. You get to decide who stays, who goes, who deserves your time and energy and love. And everyone else? They can watch from a distance. Wonder what happened. Wonder how you did it. But they don't get to be part of the story anymore. Because you're writing a new one. And in this version, you're the hero. Not the victim. Not the punchline. Not the charity case. The hero. And that's exactly what I was. Not because I had money, but because I'd taken everything they'd tried to use to break me, and I'd built something beautiful with it. They said I'd die poor and forgotten, but I was living rich and remembered. By the women I helped. By the lives I changed. By the legacy I was building. And that was more than enough. That was everything. October arrived with rain and wind, and the kind of gray skies that made you want to stay inside with a book and a blanket. I was in my home office, reviewing applications for the foundation's winter grant cycle, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Jessica stood on my porch, holding an umbrella, looking thinner than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wasn't wearing makeup. She looked tired, defeated. I almost didn't open the door. Almost turned around and went back to my office and pretended I hadn't seen her. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the small part of me that still remembered what it felt like to be desperate. I opened the door. Jessica looked up, surprised. Natalie. Hi. What are you doing here? I asked. I know I shouldn't have come, she said quickly. I know you don't want to see me. But I didn't know where else to go. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there, waiting. I lost my job, she said. I know, I said. Rachel told me. Her face crumbled slightly. Of course she did. Jessica looked down at her feet. I messed up. I got desperate and I lied about clients and they caught me. And now I can't find work anywhere because word got out and no one will hire me. I didn't say anything. Colin left me, she continued. My boyfriend. He said he couldn't be with someone who was unemployed and had a criminal brother. So now I'm alone and broke and I don't know what to do. Her voice cracked on the last word. I felt something shift in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. I'd been where she was. Not in the same way, but I'd known what it felt like to have nothing. To feel like the world had turned its back. Why are you here, Jessica? I asked quietly. She looked up at me. Tears streaming down her face. I need help. And you're the only person I know who has the resources to give it. There it was. The truth. She wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to make amends. She was here because she needed something. And I was the bank. I took a breath. You spent 10 years making me feel worthless. You mocked me. You dismissed me. You laughed at me in front of the entire family. And now you're standing on my porch asking me for help because you're desperate. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. I know I don't deserve it. You're right, I said. You don't. She flinched. But I'm going to help you anyway, I said. Her head snapped up. What? Not because you deserve it, I continued. And not because we're family. But because I'm not going to be the kind of person who kicks someone when they're down. Even if that someone spent years doing exactly that to me. Jessica stared at me, her mouth slightly open. I'm going to give you the contact information for the foundation, I said. You can apply for a grant. If you qualify, you'll get funding to retrain for a new career. Get back on your feet. Build something real this time. That's it? She asked. That's it, I said. No special treatment. No shortcuts. You apply like everyone else. You do the work like everyone else. And if you make it through, you get the same support everyone else gets. She was crying again, but different this time. Softer. Natalie, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I said. Just do better. Be better. Stop performing your life and start actually living it. She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't respond to that. Because sorry didn't fix anything. Sorry didn't erase the past. But maybe, just maybe, it was a starting point. I gave her the foundation's website and told her to submit an application by the end of the month. Then I closed the door. I stood there in my entryway for a long time, processing what had just happened. Part of me felt good about it. Like I'd done the right thing. But another part of me felt something else. Not regret exactly, but awareness. That helping her didn't mean trusting her. That giving her a chance didn't mean letting her back into my life. I could be kind without being a doormat. I could offer support without opening myself up to more hurt. And that distinction mattered. It was the difference between being generous and being used. Later that evening, I called Rachel and told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about it? She asked. Honestly? I don't know. Do you think she'll actually apply? I asked. I think she will, Rachel said. Because she doesn't have any other options. That's what I figured. Rachel sighed. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Even if she doesn't deserve it. Maybe especially because she doesn't deserve it, I said. Exactly. We talked for a few more minutes, and then we hung up. I went back to my office and continued reviewing applications. Women who'd lost everything. Women who were trying to rebuild. Women who just needed someone to believe in them. Jessica's situation wasn't unique. What made it complicated was our history. But if I could separate that, if I could look at her application the way I looked at everyone else's, then maybe there was a path forward. Not to reconciliation. Not to pretending the past didn't happen. But to something new. Something different. November came fast, and with it Thanksgiving. I didn't go to any family dinners. Instead, I volunteered at the nonprofit, serving meals to the women in the program. It was the best Thanksgiving I'd had in years. Rachel joined me, and we spent the day cooking and serving and talking with women who were grateful for a hot meal and a safe place to be. At the end of the day, one of the women, an older lady named Diane, came up to me. Thank you for being here, she said. You didn't have to spend your holiday with us. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, I told her. And I meant it. This was family. Not blood family. But chosen family. The kind that showed up. The kind that cared. The kind that didn't measure your worth by your bank account or your job title or your last name. That night, Rachel and I sat in my living room with leftovers and wine. This was nice, she said. Really nice. I smiled. It was. She looked at me. Do you ever miss them? The family? Sometimes, I admitted. Not the way they treated me. But the idea of them. What they could have been if they'd been different. Rachel nodded. I get that. But they weren't different, I said. And I can't keep wishing they were. You're right, she said. And you're better off without them. I know. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire in the fireplace. And I realized something. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn their approval. Trying to prove I was worth something. Trying to be enough. But I'd had it backwards. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to prove anything. I was already enough. And the moment I'd realized that, everything had changed. December brought the winter grant cycle results. Out of 200 applications, we selected 25 women to receive funding. Jessica was one of them. I'd recused myself from reviewing her application. Let the committee make the decision without my influence. And they'd chosen her. Not because she was my sister, but because her application was strong. Because she'd outlined a clear plan. Because she'd demonstrated genuine need and genuine commitment. When I saw her name on the list, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. But mostly, I felt hope. Hope that maybe she'd actually do the work. That maybe she'd actually change. That maybe this was her rock bottom, and she'd use it to build something better. The grant ceremony was in mid-December. All 25 recipients were there. Jessica sat in the back, looking nervous. When her name was called, she walked to the front and accepted her certificate. I handed it to her myself. Our eyes met for just a moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," I said quietly. "Thank yourself. Do the work." She nodded and walked back to her seat. After the ceremony, she came up to me. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I have a few minutes," I said. We stepped outside into the cold. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. "I just want you to know that I'm taking this seriously. I'm not going to waste this opportunity." "Good," I said. "And I'm going to prove to you that I can change." "You don't have to prove anything to me," I said. "You have to prove it to yourself." She looked at me, and for the first time and maybe ever, I saw something real in her expression. Not performance. Not manipulation. Just honesty. "I really am sorry, Natalie. For everything. I've been thinking about it a lot. About how we treated you. And I'm ashamed." I nodded. "I appreciate you saying that." She hesitated. "Do you think we'll ever be able to have a real relationship? Siblings?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But not right now. Right now, you need to focus on yourself. On doing the work. On becoming someone you can be proud of." She nodded. "Okay." We stood there for another moment. Then she said, "Your foundation is incredible. What you're doing for these women, it's really special." "Thank you." "I mean it," she said. "You're making a difference. And I know I don't have the right to say this, but I'm proud of you." I looked at her. For years, I'd wanted to hear those words from her. Wanted her approval. Her recognition. And now that I had it, I realized it didn't change anything. Because I didn't need it anymore. I'd already proven everything I needed to prove. To myself. "Take care of yourself, Jessica," I said. "And good luck." I walked back inside, leaving her standing in the cold. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt clear. Because forgiveness wasn't something you could rush. It wasn't something you could force. It had to be earned over time, through consistent action, through proof that the change was real. And maybe Jessica would do that. Maybe she'd put in the work and become someone different. Someone better. But that wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to keep building. Keep growing. Keep helping the women who needed it. And that's exactly what I did. Christmas came, and I spent it quietly. Rachel came over, and we cooked dinner together and watched movies and laughed until our sides hurt. It was simple. It was peaceful. It was everything the holidays should be. On Christmas night, I stood on my deck and looked out at the lake. The water was dark and still, reflecting the lights from the houses around it. And I thought about how far I'd come. From the girl who sat at the end of the table, invisible and dismissed, to the woman who owned the table and chose who sat at it. From the person they mocked for taking the bus, to the person who could buy the entire bus company if she wanted to. From the one they said would die poor and forgotten, to the one who was living rich and remembered. Not because of the money, but because of the choices I'd made with it. Because I'd used it to build something that mattered. Something that would outlast me. Something that would change lives long after I was gone. They tried to bury me, but they'd forgotten something important. I wasn't a seed that would rot in the ground. I was a seed that would grow, that would push through the dirt and reach for the sun, that would bloom in ways they never imagined. And now I was standing in full bloom, surrounded by the life I'd built, the work I'd created, the legacy I was leaving. They'd said I'd amount to nothing, but I'd become everything. Not in spite of them, but because of them. Because every insult had been fuel. Every dismissal had been motivation. Every moment they'd tried to make me feel small had reminded me exactly how big I wanted to become. And now I was here, living in a house they couldn't afford, running a foundation they couldn't imagine, helping women they'd never notice, building a legacy they'd never understand. I'd won. Not because I'd destroyed them, but because I'd risen so far above them that their opinions didn't even register anymore. They were background noise. And I was the symphony. As I stood there on my deck, looking out at the water, I made a promise to myself. I would never forget where I came from. Would never forget what it felt like to be counted out. Would never forget the women who were still sitting at tables where they didn't belong, waiting for someone to see them. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure they didn't have to wait as long as I did. Because that was the real victory. Not the money. Not the house. Not the revenge. But the ability to turn pain into purpose. To transform struggle into strength. To take everything they'd used to try to break me and build something beautiful with it. They'd said I'd die poor and forgotten. But I was going to live forever. In the businesses I funded. In the educations I made possible. In the futures I helped create. In every woman who looked at my story and thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. That was immortality. That was legacy. That was everything. And as the year came to a close, and I stood in the home I'd bought with money they didn't know I had, doing work they couldn't comprehend, living a life they'd never imagined, I realized something profound. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need them to understand. Because I understood. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.